The courtroom was silent except for the soft shuffling of papers and the occasional cough from the gallery. Officer Derek Bradley sat at the defendant's table, his jaw tight, his uniform crisp, despite the circumstances that brought him here. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Mitchell Graves, whispered last-minute reassurances that this would be nothing more than a formality. After all, Derek had been through internal reviews before. He always walked away clean. Behind him, the gallery was packed. Local reporters filled the back 2 rows, their notebooks ready. Community activists who'd been following Bradley's career for years sat in silent anticipation, and scattered throughout were faces Derek might have recognized if he'd bothered to look. Faces from traffic stops, from random checks, from encounters that had lasted minutes for him but haunted others for years. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. All rise for the Honorable Judge Cassandra Williams. Derek stood mechanically, his eyes focused straight ahead. He'd been in courtrooms before, testifying in cases he'd worked. This was different, but he wasn't worried. The union had his back. The department had his back. The system had his back. It always did. Judge Williams entered with measured steps, her black robes flowing behind her like shadows. She was a woman in her early 50s, her face composed, unreadable. Her hair was pulled back in a professional bun, streaks of silver running through it like badges of honor. Her eyes, however, held something deeper, a sharpness that seemed to cut through the room's tension. She took her seat, arranged her papers with deliberate precision, and looked directly at Officer Bradley. "We've met before, Officer Bradley." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Derek's confidence flickered. He studied her face, searching his memory, but found nothing. His mind raced through the hundreds of judges he'd testified before. "Your Honor, I don't believe we have." Judge Williams leaned back slightly. A ghost of something was its satisfaction crossing her features. "No, I suppose you wouldn't remember. It was 20 years ago, October 15th, to be exact. Highway 85, exit 42. Late evening, around 9:47 p.m. You pulled over a young black woman for a broken taillight." Derek shifted uncomfortably. He'd made thousands of traffic stops over his career. They blurred together like a video on fast forward. The judge continued, her voice steady, controlled, each word precisely chosen. "That woman was driving a 1999 Honda Civic, blue, rusted around the wheel wells. She was driving home from her second job at the hospital. She worked in the cafeteria to pay for law school applications. She was exhausted, scared when she saw your light. She had her law school acceptance letter on the passenger seat. She'd just picked it up from her mother's house to frame it. Yale Law School, full scholarship." The gallery began to murmur. Graves shifted nervously, sensing the ground shifting beneath his client's defense. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Derek's lawyer started to object, but Judge Williams raised a hand. "I'm not recusing myself, counselor. I'm simply establishing that Officer Bradley and I have history." She pulled out a folder from beneath her bench, its edges worn from years of handling. "Officer Bradley, do you remember what you said to that young woman that night?" Derek's mouth went dry. He genuinely didn't remember, but something cold was creeping up his spine. He'd said a lot of things over the years, things that were just part of the job, things that kept people in line, things that maintained order, things he'd learned from senior officers when he was a rookie. "You told her," Judge Williams continued, "that people like her should be careful driving through neighborhoods like this. You made her get out of the car. You made her stand in the rain for 45 minutes while you ran her plates. You called for backup, not because she was a threat, but because you wanted to, quote, make sure she understood who was in charge here." The memory was starting to surface now, hazy and distorted. A rainy night. A young black woman. Law school papers. He'd thought she was lying about the law school. They always lied. That's what his training officer had told him. They always lie. Always have an excuse. Always play the victim. "You searched her car," Judge Williams continued, her voice never wavering. "Without consent, without probable cause. You threw her acceptance letter on the wet ground. When she asked to pick it up, you told her to stay where you are unless you want real rel. You made her watch as the rain soaked through it. Derek's partner from that night, now retired Officer Tommy Hutchinson, was in the gallery. His face had gone white. He remembered now. He remembered it all. "When you finally let her go," Judge Williams said, "you leaned into her window and said, 'You might think you're going somewhere, but people like you always end up right back where you started. Yale or jail makes no difference. You people always show your true colors eventually.'" The courtroom was deadly quiet. Even Derek's lawyer had stopped shuffling his papers. The court reporter's fingers had paused over her keys. "That woman was me, Officer Bradley. And I did go somewhere. I went to law school, graduated summa cum laude. I became a prosecutor. I put away 37 corrupt cops in my first 5 years. I became a judge. And now, after 20 years, here we are. Full circle." Derek's face had gone pale. His lawyer was frantically writing notes, probably preparing grounds for appeal, for mistrial, for anything. But Judge Williams wasn't finished. "Now let's discuss why you're really here today." She opened another folder, this one thick with documents. "This isn't about one traffic stop from 20 years ago. This is about a pattern that started long before you met me and continued long after. A pattern that the department ignored, that your supervisors excused, that the union protected." The prosecutor, a young black man named James Chen, stood up. He'd specifically requested this case when it came across his desk. "Your Honor, the state would like to present evidence of systematic civil rights violations spanning Officer Bradley's entire 23-year career." Mitchell Graves shot to his feet. "Objection. This is prejudicial and beyond the scope." "Overruled," Judge Williams said calmly. "The defendant is charged with violation of civil rights under color of law. Pattern of behavior is absolutely relevant. Proceed, Counselor Chen." Chen began presenting the evidence methodically. 23 years of complaint, 143 formal complaints, only 3 ever investigated. 47 traffic stops of black drivers for every 1 white driver in predominantly white neighborhoods. Body camera footage mysteriously corrupted in 15 cases where excessive force was alleged. 3 lawsuits settled out of court, sealed records, taxpayers footing the bill. Then came the videos. The gallery gasped as the first one played. Dashcam footage from 2018. Derek pulling over Dr. Michael Washington, a cardiac surgeon at Jefferson Hospital. The doctor still in his scrubs after a 16-hour surgery. Derek's voice clear on the audio. "Awful nice car for someone like you. You steal it?" Another video. 2019. Derek stopping a black family driving to a funeral, making them all get out. The grandmother, 80 years old, forced to stand in the summer heat while Derek tore through their car. Finding nothing. No apology. Just a warning to stay where they belong. Video after video. Each one a window into a pattern of behavior that had been documented, recorded, and ignored. Derek's voice, younger but unmistakable, telling a black teenager to go back to where you belong. Derek pulling an elderly black man from his car for aggressive posturing, when the man had simply asked why he was being stopped. Derek laughing with his partner about quota hunting in the dark. But the most damning video was from just 6 months ago. A young black woman, a teacher named Sarah Martinez, pulled over 2 blocks from her school. Derek didn't know her boyfriend was recording from the passenger seat. The video showed Derek planting something in her purse during the search. The boyfriend's whispered narration, "He just put something in there. Oh my God, he just planted something." Each video was like a nail in a coffin Derek hadn't realized was being built around him. His lawyer objected to everything, but Judge Williams overruled each one with surgical precision. She knew the law. She knew procedure. She knew exactly how far she could push without giving grounds for appeal. "Your Honor," Graves finally said, desperate, "given your personal history with my client, surely you must recuse yourself. This is clearly a conflict of interest." Judge Williams looked at him steadily. "Counselor, I've presided over cases involving men who killed people who looked like my son. I've maintained impartiality when defendants used slurs that were directed at people like me my entire life. I've sentenced fairly according to the law, regardless of personal feeling. That is my job. That is my oath. That is what separates justice from vengeance. She turned to Derek. Officer Bradley, do you know what happened to that young woman after you stopped her that night 20 years ago? Derek said nothing. His throat felt like sandpaper. His hands were shaking slightly. She went home and cried. Judge Williams said. She sat in her apartment, a studio, 600 square feet, bars on the windows, and she cried until she couldn't breathe. She thought about giving up on law school before she'd even started. She wondered if you were right, if people like her really couldn't escape where they came from. She called her mother at 2 in the morning and said maybe she should just stay at the hospital, keep working in the cafeteria, keep her head down. The judge paused, her eyes never leaving Derek's face. But then she got angry, and she decided that the best response to men like you wasn't to shrink, wasn't to give up, wasn't to accept your version of her future. It was to become someone you couldn't ignore, someone with power, someone who could ensure that other young women wouldn't have to stand in the rain being humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect them. She adjusted her glasses, a simple gesture that somehow carried weight. I spent 10 years as a prosecutor. I put away dirty cops, drug dealers, murderers. I put away criminals of every color, every background, every socio-economic status. I earned my position on this bench through merit, through work, through an unwavering commitment to justice. Not vengeance, Officer Bradley. And now, you're going to learn what justice really means. The trial proceeded with mechanical precision. Witness after witness testified, each story adding another layer to the portrait of Derek Bradley's career. Marcus Thompson, a Navy veteran, testified about being stopped 5 times in 1 month after moving to a predominantly white neighborhood, each time by Officer Bradley, each time for increasingly ridiculous reasons: suspicious driving, unusual vehicle for the area, routine check. Yuki Tanaka, a pediatric oncologist, broke down describing how Derek had made her daughter watch as he handcuffed her during a routine stop on the way to the girl's violin recital. No ticket was issued. No reason was ever given. The daughter, now 16, still had panic attacks when she saw police cars. Reverend William Foster, 72 years old, described being forced to lie face down on hot asphalt because Derek claimed he fit a description. The description, it turned out, was black male between 20 and 40 years old. Then Derek's partner from 15 years ago testified under immunity. Officer Michael Kowalski, now living in Florida, appeared via video link. His testimony was devastating. He confirmed what they'd called their evening drives, specifically targeting minority drivers in white neighborhoods. He produced a notebook where Derek had actually kept score. It was like a game to him, Kowalski said, his voice heavy with what might have been guilt. He had 5 points for a stop that led to a search, 10 if they cried, 20 if they filed a complaint that went nowhere. The gallery erupted. Judge Williams had to call for order 3 times. Then came the revelation that broke the case wide open. Chen presented financial records. Officer Bradley had been taking payments from a private security firm called Neighborhood Watch Solutions. The firm was funded by 3 homeowners associations in affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods. The message in their contract was coded, but clear. Keep undesirable elements out of certain areas. The payments totaled $106,000 over 8 years. Derek had been literally paid to harass minority drivers. He turned prejudice into profit. Derek watched his world crumble in real time. His union rep left the courtroom during a recess and never came back. His fellow officers in the gallery looked away. Even his lawyer seemed to deflate, going through the motions of a defense he knew was hopeless. When it came time for Derek to testify, he took the stand with none of his earlier confidence. His uniform, which had always made him feel powerful, now felt like a costume he'd been caught wearing. Judge Williams watched him with those sharp eyes, and he finally understood what his victims had felt all those years, the weight of being judged by someone who held your future in their hands. Officer Bradley, Judge Williams said, do you have anything to say before sentencing? Derek looked up at her. For 20 years, he'd worn his badge like armor, He believed he was protecting something, maintaining order, keeping the peace. He told himself the lies that made it easier. They were suspicious. They didn't belong. They were probably guilty of something anyway. "Your Honor," he began, his voice cracking. "I believed I was doing my job. I believed I was protecting." "Protecting who?" Judge Williams interrupted. "From whom? Every person you stopped, every family you harassed, every young man you roughed up. They were all American citizens. They all had rights. They all deserved protection. You were supposed to be that protection." She leaned forward slightly. "You know what the real tragedy is, Officer Bradley? It's not just the lives you disrupted. It's not just the fear you instilled. It's not just the tax dollars wasted on settling lawsuits for your behavior. It's that you made people lose faith in the very institution meant to protect them. You turned the badge into a weapon against the people it was meant to serve." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, none of them would look at Derek. The foreman, an older white man who looked like he might have been sympathetic to a cop, stood and read the verdict with clear conviction. Guilty on all counts: violation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy, deprivation of rights, abuse of power, false imprisonment, filing false reports. The list went on. 43 charges, 43 guilty verdicts. As Judge Williams read the sentence, 15 years federal prison, no possibility of early release for the first 5, followed by 10 years probation, permanent loss of law enforcement certification, and $500,000 in restitution to be paid to a victim's fund. Derek finally understood. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. This was the system finally working the way it was supposed to work. But Judge Williams wasn't quite finished. "Before we adjourn," she said, "I want to read something into the record." She pulled out a worn piece of paper, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. "This is the essay I wrote for my law school application, the night after Officer Bradley stopped me." The paper still showed water stains from that night in the rain. "I wrote, justice is not about power over others, it's about power used for others. Tonight, I met someone who confused the two. I met someone who saw his badge, not as a responsibility, but as a weapon. I promise to never make that mistake. I promise to remember that true strength comes not from making others feel small, but from lifting them up. I promise that if I ever have power, I will use it to protect those who cannot protect themselves." She looked directly at Derek. "I kept that promise, Officer Bradley. Every day for 20 years I kept that promise. And today, that promise is fulfilled." As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he passed by the gallery. Among the faces he saw them, the people he'd stopped, harassed, humiliated over the years. They weren't gloating. They weren't celebrating. They were just relieved. Finally, someone had heard them. Finally, someone had believed them. Finally, justice had found its way to them. But there was one face that stood out. A young black woman, maybe 25, in a police uniform. She was a rookie with the city police. Badge number 7, Officer Denise Chapman. She watched Derek with an expression that was hard to read. Later, she would tell reporters that she became a cop specifically because of officers like Bradley, not to be like him, but to be the alternative, to be the protection that communities deserve. Judge Williams remained seated as the courtroom emptied. Her clerk, Marcus, approached tentatively. "Your Honor, are you all right?" She nodded slowly. "You know, Marcus, I've waited 20 years for this moment. I thought it would feel like victory, but it doesn't. It just feels necessary." She stood, gathering her robes around her. "Because this isn't about me or Officer Bradley. It's about every person who's ever been stopped for driving while black. It's about every teenager told they don't belong. It's about every citizen who's been made to feel like a criminal in their own country. It's about Rosa Martinez, who never got justice. It's about Terrell Jackson, who took his own life after his 3rd false arrest. It's about all the ones we don't know about, the ones who never filed complaints, who just accepted this as the way things are." As she walked toward her chambers, she passed the court reporter. "Make sure every word of this trial is properly recorded," she said. "Every word, every objection, every piece of evidence, because 20 years from now someone else might need to read it. Someone else might need to know that justice, though it may take time, does come. The story made national news. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they all covered it. Corrupt cop, brought down by the judge he'd once humiliated. But for Judge Cassandra Williams, it was more than that. It was proof that sometimes the arc of the universe really does bend toward justice. Sometimes the powerless become powerful. And sometimes the very people you step on while climbing your ladder of prejudice become the ones standing above you when you fall. The trial transcripts were published online. Law schools began using them as teaching materials. The phrase "pulled a Bradley" entered police academy lexicon as a cautionary tale about what happens when you abuse your power. 6 months later, Judge Williams received a letter. It was handwritten on simple notebook paper, the handwriting careful and deliberate. It was from a young black woman named Alexis Roberts, who'd just been accepted to law school. She wrote, "Your Honor, I saw your story on the news. Last month I was stopped by an officer who told me I didn't belong in that neighborhood. I was driving to my job interview at a law firm. He made me late. I didn't get the job. I was going to give up on law school, thinking maybe people like me really don't belong in that world. But then I read about you. I read every word of the trial transcript, and I decided that maybe, 20 years from now, I'll be the one holding officers like him accountable. You showed me that the wait might be long, but justice does come. Thank you for keeping your promise. I'm making the same one today." Judge Williams smiled as she wrote her reply, "Dear Alexis, the path to justice is long and difficult. There will be nights when you cry. There will be moments when you doubt. There will be people who tell you that you don't belong, that you're not good enough, that you should know your place. But remember this: every time you stand up in court, every time you speak for those who have no voice, every time you hold power accountable, you're not just practicing law, you're fulfilling a promise that justice is not about power over others, but power used for others. The system needs people like you, people who know what it's like to be powerless, because only they truly understand the weight of power. Welcome to the fight, and remember, I'll be watching. We all. The system that had protected Officer Bradley for 23 years had finally held him accountable, not through revenge, not through violence, but through the very mechanism he'd corrupted the law. And the woman he'd once dismissed as someone who would end up right back where she started, had indeed ended up exactly where she started, fighting for justice. Only now, she had the power to win. Derek Bradley served his full sentence. His name became synonymous with police corruption. His case was cited in 3 Supreme Court decisions regarding civil rights violations. His former colleagues distanced themselves. His pension was revoked. His legacy was not one of service, but of shame. But Judge Cassandra Williams' legacy was different. She went on to serve on the state Supreme Court. She established a scholarship fund for minority law students. She never forgot that rainy night on Highway 85, because forgetting would dishonor everyone who'd stood in similar rain, felt similar humiliation, and never got their day in court. If this story moved you, remember that justice requires persistence. It requires people willing to climb to positions of power not for themselves, but to fix the very systems that once oppressed them. Share this story. Subscribe for more. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't anger, it's excellence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming the person they said you could never be, and then using that position to ensure no one else has to prove them wrong the way you did.